It started with a laugh, or rather what should have been one. The lights on stage were sharp, the air electric, and the audience inside the Los Angeles studio was buzzing with excitement. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Cameras rolled, applause echoed, and Hasan Minhaj, known for his sharp tongue and fearless humor, stepped forward to greet his royal guest. "Welcome, Harry," he said cheerfully, flashing his signature grin. The crowd clapped, but the energy shifted in an instant. Prince Harry, sitting upright in his chair, smiled tightly. It wasn't the warm grin of a man amused by the joke. It was the stiff, measured kind you see from someone pretending to find humor where none exists. The silence that followed wasn't accidental. It was the kind that speaks louder than words. For most people watching live, it seemed like a minor thing, a comedian being casual with a celebrity guest. But for those who followed the strange, twisting saga of Prince Harry's public transformation, it was something much deeper. You could almost see it on his face. That old royal pride clashing violently with the modern world's indifference to titles. This wasn't Buckingham Palace. This was Hasan Minhaj's world. A world where status meant little if you couldn't laugh at yourself. Yet for Harry, that single moment, a missing Your Highness, felt like an insult to everything he had been raised to embody. The irony is that Harry had come to the show with a very different mission. His team had pitched the interview as part of a new media strategy. A way to show that the Duke of Sussex could be relatable, funny, and down to earth. He'd been told this would be lighthearted, a chance to charm audiences that had grown weary of his constant feuds with the press and the palace. But what no one seemed to prepare him for was Hasan Minhaj's brand of humor. A mirror that reflects everything people are too proud to see in themselves. That mirror on that stage was about to shatter. From the first question, Hasan's tone was playful but pointed. He joked about Harry's Netflix boss status, about being the only royal with a podcast, and even threw in a jab about the infamous chicken coop at the couple's California mansion. The audience laughed, but Harry didn't. His responses grew shorter. His shoulders tightened. At one point, Hasan playfully asked, "So, Harry, what do we call you now? Prince? Duke? Or just the guy who ghosted his grandma's crown?" The crowd erupted. Meghan's smile from the audience faltered. The camera caught Harry exhaling slowly, the corners of his mouth twitching in restrained irritation. What was meant to be a comedic exchange now teetered on the edge of public humiliation. That's the moment it happened. Hasan, noticing Harry's unease, tried to lighten the mood. "Relax, Harry," he said, still smiling. "You're not in court. You're in comedy." But instead of laughter, Harry's face froze completely. "I'd appreciate being addressed properly," he muttered, voice low but firm. The studio went quiet. You could hear the uncomfortable rustle of clothes, the shifting of an audience that didn't know whether to laugh or stay silent. Hasan blinked, momentarily thrown off. Then, in true comedian fashion, he leaned into it. "Properly?" he asked. "Oh, you mean like, Your Highness? I didn't know we still did that in 2025. That line detonated like a small bomb. The audience burst into laughter, nervous at first, then roaring. But Harry didn't laugh. His face flushed. He looked around the studio, eyes darting toward the producers as if waiting for someone to intervene. Meghan, seated off stage, leaned forward, whispering something to a nearby assistant. It was the kind of moment every talk show host dreams of, unplanned, raw, impossible to look away from. But for Harry, it was another public unraveling. Another reminder that he could no longer control the narrative the way he once did. And that's exactly where this story begins. Not in the humor, but in the humiliation. Because behind every royal title lies a fragile thing called ego. And on that stage, in front of millions, that ego cracked. When the cameras stopped rolling, reports suggest that Harry stormed off the set briefly before being persuaded to return for the final segment. Staffers described the mood backstage as tense and uncomfortable. One production assistant, speaking anonymously later, claimed she heard Harry say, "I won't be mocked on my own time." Meghan, meanwhile, was reportedly livid. not at Hasan, but at how her husband handled the situation. "We talked about composure," she allegedly told him afterward. "We needed laughter, not headlines." But headlines were exactly what they got. Within hours, clips from the show began circulating online. A 30-second video of the exchange spread across social media like wildfire. One side mocked Harry's reaction, calling him out of touch, thin-skinned, and still playing Prince in a democracy. The other side accused Hasan Minhaj of disrespect, claiming that Americans don't understand British decorum. But the truth, as always, was far more complicated. What really unfolded on that stage wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a collision between two worlds: the centuries-old rigidity of monarchy and the unapologetic irreverence of modern comedy. To understand why Harry reacted the way he did, you have to look deeper, beyond the titles, beyond the PR smiles. You have to look at the man who spent years trying to redefine himself while never fully letting go of what he was born into. For Harry, the Your Highness isn't just a title. It's a symbol of identity, the last thread connecting him to a heritage he both rejects and craves. Every time someone denies him that title, it's like they're denying his place in history. But in the world of late-night comedy, that kind of reverence doesn't exist. You earn respect through authenticity, not ancestry. And that's where Harry's world fell apart that night. People close to Hasan later said he hadn't meant to offend. He was simply doing what comedians do, challenging the powerful, poking at pride, revealing the cracks in public personas. But for Harry, already bruised by years of ridicule from the British press and whispers of waning fame, this was one joke too many. A man who once wore medals of war now found himself wounded by words. As the clip continued to trend, experts began weighing in. Media analysts called it a defining moment in Harry's post-royal career. Public relations consultants described it as a lesson in tone deafness. One commentator said, "You can't spend years telling people you're just like them and then demand royal treatment on a talk show." It was a brutal observation, but not an inaccurate one. The public had grown weary of contradictions. Harry, the man who spoke of equality, still expected deference. Hasan, the man who mocked power, refused to bow. The result? A cultural flashpoint that said more about the modern monarchy than any interview could. But perhaps what made this incident resonate so deeply was how human it felt. Behind the cameras, beyond the glare of celebrity, it was just a man embarrassed on stage, struggling to balance pride and vulnerability. You could almost feel his frustration, the instinct to defend his dignity colliding with the realization that doing so would only make him look worse. In that split second, Harry wasn't a prince or a public figure. He was just someone losing control of the image he'd spent years trying to rebuild. In the days that followed, new layers of the story began to surface. Rumors claimed Meghan contacted Hasan's producers privately, asking them to contextualize the exchange before broadcast. Other reports suggested that Netflix executives, already uneasy about the couple's polarizing reputation, were furious that yet another controversy had erupted. There were even whispers that the segment might be edited, but Hasan allegedly refused. "Comedy isn't a courtroom," he told his team. "If we start censoring truth for comfort, we lose the point." That single line, simple, defiant, and honest, captured the entire conflict. A prince demanding recognition, a comedian defending authenticity, a culture caught between reverence and rebellion. The irony was poetic. Harry, who had spent years running from the crown, was now angry that someone refused to see it. By the week's end, the fallout was impossible to ignore. Talk shows dissected the encounter. Royal biographers speculated about Harry's growing isolation. Social commentators framed it as a metaphor for fading relevance. Some said he was justified. Others said he'd forgotten the very humility he once preached. But one thing was clear. The world had witnessed something raw, something unscripted. A moment that stripped away layers of PR polish and exposed the real power dynamics of fame. And that's what makes this story more than just gossip. It's a mirror reflecting a truth that resonates far beyond the walls of a TV studio. It's about pride, perception, and the fragile line between respect and ridicule. It's about what happens when someone born to be bowed to steps into a world where no one bows anymore. That's the essence of what played out on Hasan Minhaj's stage, and why people can't stop talking about it. Because this wasn't just a talk show moment. It was a reckoning. For Prince Harry, it forced a confrontation with the identity he's been chasing for years. Half royal, half rebel, never fully at peace with either. For Hasan Minhaj, it became a defining stand for the right to challenge power without apology. And for the audience, it was a reminder of how quickly fame can shift from fascination to farce. So what really happened that night? What words were exchanged off camera? Why did Meghan reportedly leave the studio early, visibly shaken? And what does this all mean for the image of a man who once promised to escape the cage of royalty, only to find himself trapped by ego instead? Those are the questions this video will explore. By the end of this story, you'll see that what seemed like a simple misunderstanding was really a turning point. Not just for Harry, but for the very idea of royalty in a world that no longer kneels. Because when a title loses its power, all that's left is the person behind it. And sometimes, that person isn't ready to face the laughter and the weeks leading up to the show. The air around Prince Harry's team buzzed with nervous anticipation. His public image had taken hit after hit over the past few months. Criticism from British tabloids, dwindling public sympathy, and the growing perception that his once powerful voice had lost its impact. Inside Montecito, where Harry and Meghan now lived a world away from the pomp of palace walls, strategy meetings were frequent and tense. Meghan, ever the media tactician, believed a light-hearted television appearance could help humanize Harry again. Their advisors agreed. The goal was simple: make him seem approachable, charming, and relatable. Hasan Minhaj's show seemed like the perfect opportunity. It had a diverse audience, a reputation for sharp humor, and a global reach. What could possibly go wrong? Hasan's team had extended the invitation months earlier, and negotiations had been painstaking. Every question had to be pre-approved by Harry's media handlers, every segment discussed in detail. They had been promised that the tone would remain respectful and uplifting, focusing on philanthropy, family, and Harry's work with veterans. But behind the scenes, the producers knew that Hasan was never one to shy away from uncomfortable truths. His humor wasn't mean-spirited, but it was incisive, designed to cut through pretense and reveal the heart of a story. And that's precisely why his fans loved him. The morning of the taping began with the quiet hum of production. Inside the studio, technicians adjusted lights, checked microphones, and tested camera angles. Outside, a small crowd gathered, eager to catch a glimpse of the Duke of Sussex. Paparazzi flashed cameras as Harry arrived in a sleek black SUV, escorted by 2 security guards. He stepped out dressed casually but impeccably. Navy suit, white shirt open at the collar, no tie. He wanted to look royal but not rigid, confident yet relatable. Meghan followed shortly after, wearing a cream-colored dress that seemed calculated to project both elegance and warmth. Inside the green room, the atmosphere was professional but tense. A producer offered Harry coffee, which he politely declined. He sat on the couch, glancing occasionally at his notes, as if rehearsing his answers. Meghan, meanwhile, spoke with the show's publicist, her voice calm but firm, ensuring everything was in line with expectations. What neither of them realized was that Hasan, in another part of the building, was quietly revising his opening lines. He believed in spontaneity, in the power of a moment unscripted. He had no intention of being disrespectful, but he also refused to treat Harry like royalty. "He's here as a guest," he reportedly told his writers. "Not a monarch." Backstage whispers painted 2 different worlds preparing to collide. On one side, a former prince trying to control his image. On the other, a comedian determined to break through that control. Producers sensed the tension but pressed on. Cameras were tested, the audience seated, and just before the show began, an assistant gave Hasan the 5-minute warning. He turned to his crew and smiled. "Let's have fun," he said. "Just remember, no one's untouchable." Meanwhile, in the dressing room, Harry adjusted his cufflinks, glancing at his reflection. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe even apprehension. Megan squeezed his hand. "Be yourself," she said. "Show them the real you." He nodded, though it was unclear which version of himself he planned to show. When the stage manager finally gave the cue, Hasan stepped out first, greeted by thunderous applause. His presence filled the room with energy. He cracked a few warm-up jokes about cultural differences and the absurdity of fame before announcing the night's special guest. "Please welcome the man who walked away from a crown but not from the spotlight, Prince Harry." The crowd erupted. Harry appeared, smiling, waving modestly, his practiced charm on full display. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every nuance of expression. First, everything seemed fine. Hasan opened with a few softball questions about Harry's charity work, his thoughts on modern leadership, and how fatherhood had changed him. Harry answered smoothly, his voice steady, his tone carefully modulated. But Hasan's energy was different. He moved fast, his wit razor-sharp, puncturing the polished surface of Harry's rehearsed answers. When Harry spoke of freedom and breaking away from tradition, Hasan leaned forward and quipped, "Freedom from what exactly? Responsibility or family WhatsApp groups?" The audience laughed. Harry smiled faintly, unsure if it was safe to laugh along. That's when Hasan decided to test the waters. "So tell me, Harry, can I call you Harry?" he asked casually. "Or do I need to use the official title? His Royal Highness, Duke of Sussex, Slayer of Protocols." The crowd chuckled again. Harry's expression flickered. He paused a moment too long before answering. "Harry is fine," he said, though his tone betrayed a hint of discomfort. Hasan grinned. "Great, because I left my throne in the car." The laughter swelled again, but the tension on stage was beginning to show. From the control room, producers exchanged uneasy glances. They could sense the atmosphere shifting, a subtle but unmistakable friction building between host and guest. Harry's answers became shorter, more defensive. He started avoiding eye contact, glancing toward the audience as if searching for an ally. Megan, seated just offstage, noticed it too. She leaned toward one of the crew members and whispered something that made him nod nervously. Behind the cameras, crew members whispered about the contrast between the two men. Hasan's confidence came from years of earning his platform, carving his voice in a world that rewarded authenticity. Harry's confidence came from inheritance and image, two things Hasan instinctively challenged. For Hasan, titles meant nothing. For Harry, they were part of his DNA. It was a recipe for conflict, and everyone in that studio could feel it simmering just below the surface. The segment continued, but the energy was no longer light. Hasan tried to bring humor back, cracking a joke about royal fashion. "You guys really set the bar high for suits that cost more than my first car." But Harry barely reacted. He gave polite smiles, his laughter mechanical. The comedian, sensing the unease, shifted tactics. He began to probe deeper, asking about Harry's ongoing tensions with his family, about the balance between privacy and publicity. "You've said before that you want privacy," Hasan noted, "but you also signed multimillion-dollar deals to tell your story. How do you reconcile that?" The question hung heavy in the air. Harry froze. This wasn't in the pre-approved list of topics. His PR manager, watching from the wings, stiffened visibly. Megan's expression turned to stone. Harry finally replied, "I think transparency is part of healing. I have a right to share my truth." Hasan nodded. "Fair. But transparency isn't the same as entitlement, right?" The audience gasped softly. It wasn't an attack, but the implication was clear. From that point on, the balance of the conversation shifted completely. What was meant to be an easy exchange became an interrogation cloaked in comedy. Harry was no longer a guest in control of his story. He was a subject in someone else's. The laughter grew louder, but not all of it was friendly. And deep down, Harry could sense it. When the first segment ended and the show cut to a commercial break, Harry leaned toward one of the producers and said quietly, "I thought this was supposed to be respectful." The producer smiled awkwardly. "It is, sir. Hasan's just doing his job." Harry didn't respond. He sat back in silence, his jaw tight, his fingers tapping against his knee. Meghan walked over briefly, whispering, "Stay calm. We'll handle this after." But the damage was already done. What neither of them knew was that the night's tone had been set long before the cameras started rolling. From the moment Hasan decided to drop the formalities and simply call him Harry, the power dynamics had shifted. The audience could feel it. The staff could feel it. And, most importantly, Harry could feel it. For a man who had spent a lifetime commanding deference, being addressed casually on public television felt less like a gesture of equality and more like an insult. Yet, in many ways, this was inevitable. Harry had entered a space where titles meant nothing and authenticity meant everything. Hasan's studio wasn't the gilded halls of Buckingham. It was the court of public opinion, where laughter was the only currency that mattered. And in that arena, Harry's royal armor was useless. That first segment set the stage for everything that followed: the confrontation, the outburst, the viral backlash. It was the calm before the storm, the moment when two worlds collided. One built on inherited authority, the other on earned credibility. By the time the cameras resumed rolling, something about the atmosphere felt charged, unpredictable. The audience, still laughing softly from the previous segment, waited eagerly for what would come next. Little did they know, they were about to witness one of the most awkward on-air exchanges in recent television history. Hasan began casually, trying to reintroduce some humor. "You know, Harry," he said with a grin, "I've always wondered what it's like to quit being a prince. I mean, regular people quit jobs all the time. Did you hand in a royal resignation letter? Like, 'Dear Grandma, I'm out'?" The crowd laughed, roaring even louder when he mimed writing the letter in the air. "P.S. Keep the crown. I'm good with Netflix stock options." Most guests would have laughed that off, maybe even added to the joke. But Harry's smile was restrained, his posture stiff. "Well," he replied carefully, "leaving wasn't as simple as that. It was about creating a healthier environment for my family." Hasan nodded, clearly sensing the discomfort but unwilling to let the energy drop. "Totally," he said, pretending to wipe imaginary sweat from his forehead. "I get it. I tried to leave my parents' house once, too. My mom said, 'You'll come back when you realize the Wi-Fi doesn't pay for itself.'" The audience chuckled again, but Harry's expression didn't change. He glanced briefly toward the camera, then back at Hasan. And then came the moment that shifted everything. Hasan, improvising as he always did, reached out his hand and said with mock ceremony, "Well, welcome, Harry." His tone was warm, friendly, but casual, too casual. Harry froze. The silence lasted less than 2 seconds, but it stretched endlessly in the room. His lips pressed into a thin line. His eyes flicked toward the audience, then the camera, as if registering the break in protocol. He shifted in his seat and forced a small laugh, the kind that hides irritation under politeness. "It's actually Prince Harry," he said, his voice carrying just enough firmness to silence the laughter. Hasan blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said quickly, still smiling. "I didn't know we were doing titles today. My bad. Your Highness." His exaggerated bow earned another round of laughter from the audience. But this time the laughter wasn't shared by Harry. His face tightened further, his jaw clenching as he adjusted his cufflink. A nervous tick that cameras picked up in high definition. The room's energy split in half. Half the audience laughed louder, thinking Hasan was riffing. The other half fell quiet, sensing the shift. Meghan, seated in the front row, leaned forward, whispering something to a staffer. Her face was pale, her eyes sharp. It was clear that what had been planned as a charming, PR-friendly moment was unraveling faster than anyone could control. Hasan, realizing the awkwardness, tried to recover. "No disrespect, man," he said, raising his hands. "I'm just not used to hanging out with royalty. The last time I saw a crown was on a Burger King logo." The audience erupted again, grateful for the relief of laughter. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Harry didn't laugh. He didn't even fake a smile this time. He leaned slightly forward, his voice lower now, more deliberate. "It's about respect," he said. "Some titles are earned, not given." That statement caught Hasan off guard. The audience quieted instantly. Even the camera operators seemed to pause, their lenses fixed on Harry's tense expression. Hasan sat back, blinking slowly. Then, with the instinct of a performer who's faced every kind of crowd, he responded. "Respect, sure," he said calmly. "But I thought leaving the royal family meant leaving all that behind. My mistake." The silence that followed wasn't the good kind, the comedic pause that makes people laugh harder. It was the kind that makes people uncomfortable. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay quiet. Some giggled nervously. Others turned their heads, waiting for Harry's reaction. Harry took a breath, the kind that sounds louder when the room is silent. "Leaving doesn't mean forgetting who you are," he said. "It means redefining it." Hasan nodded thoughtfully. "Fair point," he said. Then, with a smile that carried more edge than warmth, he added, "I guess redefining still comes with a bit of royalty attached, huh?" This time, even the audience didn't laugh. The tension had turned thick, unsteady, almost theatrical. It felt less like an interview and more like a duel. Each man defending his ground, one with humor, the other with heritage. Offstage, producers were whispering frantically through their headsets. "Cut to commercial soon," one said. "This is getting uncomfortable." But another producer, sensing viral gold, whispered, "No, let it play." And so it did. Hasan, perhaps realizing he had struck a nerve, leaned forward again, his tone softening slightly. "Look, Harry," he said, "I didn't mean to offend you. I just think sometimes the world gets confused when people want to be both ordinary and royal. You know?" Harry didn't flinch. "It's not confusion," he replied. "It's duality. You can honor where you came from without letting it define you." Hasan smiled faintly. "I like that," he said. "Duality. But here's the thing. You can't really expect everyone to treat you like a prince if you also want to be seen as a regular guy." The audience murmured softly, sensing the truth in the comedian's words. Harry's expression, however, hardened further. "I'm not asking to be treated like a prince," he said. "I'm asking to be treated with respect." It was a reasonable statement on its own. But in that context, under those lights, it came off as defensive, even condescending. Hasan chuckled under his breath. "Trust me," he said. "If I didn't respect you, I wouldn't have invited you. I'd have just roasted you from afar like everyone else." That line hit its mark. The audience laughed again, but Harry didn't. Instead, he turned slightly toward the camera, as if aware that millions would later see this moment replayed over and over. His face betrayed a hint of anger, controlled but unmistakable. Meghan whispered something sharply to an assistant. Her expression had shifted from polite to panicked. In her mind, the damage was already done. She could imagine the headlines, the memes, the ridicule. This wasn't the friendly, redemptive moment they'd hoped for. It was a replay of every uncomfortable confrontation Harry had endured since leaving the royal family. And then came Hasan's final jab, the one that turned a tense interview into an unforgettable controversy. "I mean, you've been through a lot, right?" Hasan said, his tone deceptively kind. "The media, the family drama, the royal exit. I can't imagine how exhausting it must be to keep reminding people to call you your Highness." It was the last straw. Harry's jaw tightened. He leaned forward and said through a half-smile that barely masked his frustration, "I'm not reminding anyone of anything. I just expect decency." Hasan nodded. "Decency's fair. But comedy's not a coronation." The crowd gasped again. That was it. The exact moment the show went from awkward to explosive. Every camera in the room caught Harry's reaction. A flash of anger, a tight-lipped smile, and then silence. He looked away from Hasan, his hands clasped together, knuckles white. The audience didn't know how to react, so they stayed silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the stage lights above. For a few seconds, the two men simply stared at each other. Hasan, composed and calm, leaned back in his chair. Harry, visibly unsettled, straightened his posture and forced a smile. "Right," he said softly. "Good to know." The director finally gave the signal. "Cut to break," a voice said over the headset. The lights dimmed slightly, and the applause sign lit up. The audience clapped hesitantly, unsure whether they were applauding for the show or for the relief that it was finally over. As soon as the cameras went off, Harry stood up. His microphone was still attached, and the audio captured him muttering something under his breath as he walked off stage. Hasan stayed seated, smiling faintly, the consummate professional who knew that what had just unfolded was more than a mishap. It was a moment destined to go viral. Backstage, the tension exploded. Harry's team swarmed around him, whispering, trying to calm him down. Meghan joined moments later, her expression controlled but icy. She placed a hand on his arm and said quietly, "We'll handle it. Just don't say another word." Meanwhile, in the control booth, one of Hasan's producers turned to another and whispered, "That's going to break the internet." And it did. Within hours, the clip of Harry bristling at being called Harry instead of Your Highness flooded social media. But that's another chapter of the story. For now, what mattered was the look on Harry's face in that final moment. Caught between outrage and embarrassment, pride and exposure. It wasn't just a talk show misstep. It was a revelation. A single, unscripted moment that stripped away the polish and left behind something raw, human, and painfully real. That was the night Prince Harry stopped being a royal guest and became a global headline. The cameras cut to a commercial break, but the tension in the studio didn't fade. It thickened, stretching through the corridors like smoke that refused to disperse. In the audience, people were murmuring, replaying the moment over and over in their heads. Some whispered, "Was that real?" Others simply stared toward the stage, where the lights dimmed and technicians scrambled to reset the equipment. But one person wasn't looking at the stage at all. Meghan Markle sat frozen in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together, her jaw locked in disbelief. To the audience, her expression might have looked composed, poised, even, but for those close enough to see her face, there was no mistaking the shock. She had watched that moment unfold in slow motion. Hasan's joke, Harry's sharp retort, and then that uneasy silence that hung in the air like a storm cloud. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. This appearance was meant to be their return to charm, their redemption in the eyes of the public. A light, funny, self-aware conversation that showed the world that Prince Harry had grown comfortable enough to laugh at himself. Instead, what the cameras had captured was a royal meltdown in real time. Meghan leaned slightly toward her assistant, a young woman seated discreetly beside her. "Tell them to cut that," she whispered, her voice low and clipped. "That segment can't air as is." The assistant nodded nervously and rushed toward the production team at the side of the stage. Meghan's eyes followed her for a moment before turning back to Harry. He was standing now, pacing slightly, a hand rubbing the back of his neck. His face was red, his expression unreadable, part anger, part humiliation. From the other side of the room, Hasan Minhaj was seated at his desk, speaking quietly with one of his producers. He looked calm, composed, but there was a flicker of something in his expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or regret. He hadn't intended to offend. His comedy was about truth, not cruelty. Yet, he couldn't ignore the fact that the energy in that room had just shifted into something historic. Backstage, chaos brewed. A senior producer tried to intercept Meghan's assistant, explaining that edits couldn't be guaranteed, especially with a live audience. "We can trim the silence," the producer said cautiously. "But the exchange is part of the story now. It's authentic." Meghan's assistant didn't argue. She simply nodded and relayed the message back to her boss. When Meghan heard the word authentic, she exhaled sharply. "That's not authenticity," she said under her breath. "That's humiliation." As the minutes ticked by, studio staff moved like clockwork, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge, the royal tension unfolding in the front row. Meghan remained seated, but her eyes never left Harry. Every movement he made seemed heavier than the last. She could tell he was trying to compose himself, trying to decide whether to return to his seat for the final segment or walk away entirely. He had done this before, stormed out of interviews when he felt ambushed or misrepresented. But this was different. There were cameras, fans, and a host who wouldn't play along with the royal script. Then came the whisper, soft, but caught by a nearby boom mic that wasn't fully muted. Meghan leaned forward, her hand over her mouth, and said to one of the crew members, "He's losing it. If he snaps on air, this will destroy him." It wasn't meant to be heard, but it was. And though the production team quickly erased the recording from the official logs, several staffers later confirmed it privately. That single line would become the seed of countless online rumors and leaked, behind-the-scenes reports in the days that followed. As the show resumed, Meghan stayed in her seat, her posture rigid, her face composed into what she'd mastered long ago, the mask of calm. But her eyes betrayed her. They flickered between fear and fury, between the need to protect her husband and the awareness that she couldn't control what had already happened. When Harry finally returned to the stage, the audience clapped softly, uncertain whether to cheer or tread carefully. Hasan smiled, professional as ever, and welcomed him back. "We're good?" he asked lightly. Harry forced a nod. "We're good." But they weren't, not even close. The next few minutes of the show passed in what could only be described as damage control. Hasan, sensing the tension, toned down his humor. He asked safe questions about Harry's charity work, his family, his upcoming projects. Harry answered politely, his tone distant, his gaze unfocused. The warmth was gone, replaced by the formality he'd tried so hard to escape. He no longer looked like a man trying to connect with an audience. He looked like someone enduring a trial. From her seat, Meghan clasped her hands together and whispered to herself. Those sitting closest to her caught fragments. "Stay calm. Breathe. This will pass." But it wasn't just the moment she was trying to survive. It was what would come after. She knew better than anyone how fast the internet moved, how quickly a 5-second clip could become a meme, a headline, or a weapon. The thought of Harry being mocked again, of seeing Your Highness trend sarcastically online, made her stomach turn. When the show finally ended, the audience clapped one last time. Harry smiled faintly, shook Hasan's hand, and walked off stage. Cameras followed him briefly before cutting to credits. But what the audience didn't see was the scene that unfolded backstage moments later. Harry walked quickly down the hallway, his team trailing behind. Meghan caught up with him, calling his name softly. "Harry," she said, touching his arm. He stopped, turned, and for the first time the composure cracked. "What was that?" he asked quietly, his voice raw. "Did you see how he spoke to me? How he mocked me?" Meghan inhaled slowly. "He's a comedian," she said carefully. "It's what they do. You have to let it go." Harry shook his head. "He humiliated me." "He challenged you," Meghan corrected. "That's not the same thing." But Harry didn't agree. "I came here to talk about something meaningful," he said, his tone rising. "Not to be treated like some kind of joke. I should never have agreed to this." The corridor fell silent. Staff members exchanged uneasy glances. Meghan reached for his hand again, lowering her voice. "Listen to me. You need to calm down before anyone else sees this. We can fix it. But not if you react now." Harry exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "They'll mock me for this. Again. Every single time I try to do something right, they twist it." "They can't twist what we don't give them," Meghan said firmly. "Let's go. No statements, no reactions. We stay silent until we know what they're airing." But the truth was, silence wouldn't save them this time. By the time they reached their car, crew members were already uploading clips to private servers. Journalists were requesting audience reactions, and fans were sharing leaked photos on social media. One in particular captured Meghan's expression during the exact moment Hasan called her husband Harry. Her face was half-shadowed, her eyes wide, lips pressed tightly together. The image spread across the internet within hours, captioned with phrases like, "the face of shock," "when the crown meets comedy," and Meghan realizing this isn't Buckingham anymore. Inside the car, the mood was heavy. Meghan sat beside Harry, scrolling through her phone, watching the first ripples of public reaction. Harry stared out the window, jaw clenched. "They're laughing," he muttered finally. "They're always laughing." "Then let them," Meghan said quietly. "We'll take control of it tomorrow." But control was slipping through their fingers faster than either of them realized. That one whisper backstage, "He's losing it," was already being repeated in online gossip circles. Producers were leaking anonymous quotes, journalists were piecing together behind-the-scenes accounts, and by the next morning, every major entertainment outlet had a headline ready. "Prince Harry explodes on Hasan Minhaj show," one read. "Meghan Markle's silent panic," said another. "Comedy meets monarchy, and the crown cracks," read a third. By dawn, the incident had become a global talking point. Commentators debated whether Hasan had gone too far, whether Harry had overreacted, and whether Meghan's shocked expression proved that even she knew the moment had gone off the rails. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had the full story. Not yet, because what no one saw that night, what the cameras missed, was how that single moment backstage revealed the deeper truth about Harry and Meghan's struggle. They had left the palace to build their own narrative, to control their image and their voice. But every time they stepped into the public eye, the same cracks appeared. The same fragility surfaced. And no matter how much they tried to modernize royalty, the ghosts of hierarchy followed them everywhere. That night, Hasan Minhaj hadn't just stripped away a title. He'd exposed a fault line, the one between who Harry wanted to be and who the world still saw him as. And for Meghan, sitting there watching it all unfold, that realization was far more terrifying than any joke could ever be. The morning after the show aired, the world awoke to a digital explosion. Screens lit up with clips of the tense exchange, and social media timelines were flooded with hot takes, memes, and outrage. It was as if two cultures, two mentalities, had collided in front of a live studio audience. On one side, defenders of the Duke of Sussex, who Prince Harry had always seen himself as a bridge between worlds, a man who could balance royal dignity with modern authenticity. But that bridge on Hasan's stage had collapsed under the weight of pride. The problem wasn't simply that Hasan refused to call him "Your Highness." It was that Harry couldn't understand why it mattered so little to everyone else. To him, the title represented respect, lineage, history. To an American audience, it represented hierarchy, something to be laughed at, not bowed to. And therein lay the cultural chasm that neither Harry nor Meghan had anticipated. American humor has always thrived on equality. It dismantles the pedestal and invites everyone to laugh together. From Johnny Carson to Stephen Colbert, from Dave Chappelle to Hasan Minhaj, comedy in the United States has one unbreakable rule. No one is untouchable. Royalty, presidents, billionaires, it doesn't matter. In America, being powerful makes you a target, not a god. That's what Harry failed to grasp when he walked onto that stage. He wasn't being insulted, he was being normalized. But for someone raised in an institution where every bow, every address, every word was measured, normal felt like humiliation. The clash wasn't just personal, it was philosophical. Hasan Minhaj wasn't mocking Harry. He was challenging the very idea that reverence should follow someone based on birthright. It was the essence of democratic humor, distilled into one awkward exchange. Your Highness wasn't just a title to Hasan. It was a punchline, a relic from another era. Yet for Harry, it was the last tether to an identity he couldn't let go of, even after walking away from the palace. As the backlash unfolded, commentators dissected every second of the exchange. On talk shows, journalists debated whether Hasan had crossed a line. Was it disrespect? One anchor asked. Or simply comedy doing its job? Royal biographers chimed in too. One noted, "Prince Harry has spent years telling the world he's just like us. But when someone treated him that way, he couldn't handle it." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Inside their California home, Harry and Meghan watched the storm unfold with growing unease. Harry scrolled through his phone in silence, his jaw tightening at every new headline. Meghan sat across from him, laptop open, scanning through clips and commentary. "It's everywhere," she said finally. "Clipped, remixed, subtitled in 6 languages. We can't spin this." Harry didn't answer right away. He simply stared at one particular clip, the moment Hasan said, "Comedy's not a coronation," played on loop, mocking him with its simplicity. He doesn't understand, Harry muttered at last. None of them do. Meghan looked up. Then explain it, she said. Not to him, to the people. Say what you mean. Harry sighed, rubbing his temples. If I say anything, they'll twist it again. If I stay quiet, I look weak. You look human, Meghan replied softly. That's what they wanted, remember? But Harry wasn't thinking about humanity. He was thinking about respect, about how every interview, every public appearance, seemed to chip away at whatever dignity he thought he still carried. In Britain, people criticized him for abandoning tradition. In America, they mocked him for trying to hold on to it. It felt like a trap with no exit. Meanwhile, Hasan's team was handling their own firestorm. Overnight, the clip had become the most watched moment in the show's history. Viewers flooded the comment sections with praise for Hasan's composure. That's how you handle ego, one user wrote. Another said, finally, someone said what we're all thinking. Royalty doesn't mean relevance. Yet there were also voices calling for sensitivity, accusing Hasan of humiliation disguised as humor. Hasan read them all quietly, his expression unreadable. To his writers, he said only one thing. If you can't make power uncomfortable, you're not doing comedy, you're doing PR. The divide between royal ego and American humor ran deeper than anyone expected. It wasn't just about titles or tone, it was about worldview. In the United Kingdom, reverence was woven into the fabric of culture. You didn't joke about the Queen, you didn't mock the crown, and you certainly didn't call a royal by their first name unless invited. But in America, irreverence was the default language of truth. To laugh at power wasn't rebellion, it was tradition. And in that sense, Hasan was as much a representative of his culture as Harry was of his. Observers began framing the incident as a symbol of something larger, a cultural reckoning between the old world and the new. Articles with headlines like, "The Duke Meets Democracy," and "Royalty in the Age of Humor," flooded the web. One columnist wrote, "What we saw wasn't disrespect. It was liberation. The world no longer bows to crowns. It claps for authenticity." That line went viral on its own. But for Harry, none of it felt liberating. Every laugh, every meme, every replay of that moment reinforced a deeper wound. It wasn't just about being mocked. It was about being misunderstood. He had spent years fighting against the tabloids that painted him as fragile, impulsive, or entitled. Yet here he was again, being defined by a single moment that the world had turned into a caricature. Privately, Meghan tried to reframe the narrative. "We can use this," she told him. "We can talk about respect, about empathy, about how comedy can cross boundaries." But Harry shook his head. "No," he said flatly. "If I do that, it sounds like I'm whining." Again. Behind the scenes, royal experts in London were gloating. Tabloids splashed the story across front pages, delighted by what they saw as poetic justice. "Harry finally meets his match," screamed one headline. "The prince who can't take a joke," said another. Late-night hosts in the U.S. joined in, turning the moment into fresh material. One joked, "Prince Harry wanted freedom, and now he's mad that freedom talks back." The audience laughed, unaware or perhaps unconcerned, that the joke was beginning to turn into a public shaming. For Hasan, however, the moment had already passed. He didn't issue an apology. He didn't explain himself. When asked in a later podcast about the incident, he said calmly, "If you walk into a comedy show expecting everyone to kneel, you're in the wrong room." It was the perfect summary of the cultural divide, the essence of why that night had unfolded the way it did. In many ways, Harry's anger wasn't about Hasan at all. It was about the world shifting under his feet. The reverence that once surrounded the royal family was fading, replaced by scrutiny and satire. The public no longer saw him as a figure to admire, but as a celebrity to question. That loss of reverence, that loss of control, cut deeper than he could admit. For someone raised in an environment where identity was inseparable from status, being treated like just Harry wasn't equality. It was exile. But the irony was brutal. He had chosen that exile himself. He had wanted freedom, wanted to live without the weight of the crown. Yet now that he had it, he missed the gravity that came with it. Being ordinary had its price, and it was far steeper than he imagined. As the controversy raged, a quiet question lingered beneath the noise. Could Harry exist without reverence? Could he truly be one of the people while still expecting the respect of a prince? It was the question that defined his life, and now it had been laid bare in front of millions by a single American comedian. By the end of that week, the narrative was set. Hasan Minhaj became a symbol of unflinching humor. Harry became a symbol of fragile pride. Both men had walked into that studio representing something larger than themselves, and both had left transformed. And in living rooms across the world, people debated not just who was right, but what the moment meant. Was it the end of royal mystique, or the beginning of something more honest? Whatever it was, one thing was certain. That night, the illusion of royalty met the reality of democracy, and democracy laughed at by sunrise. The world had already chosen its side. The clip of Hasan Minhaj calling Prince Harry Harry, and the prince's visible discomfort had gone viral across every social platform. Twitter, or what was now rebranded as X, became the epicenter of a cultural earthquake. Within hours, hashtags like #NotYourHighness, #ComedyVsCrown, and #HarryMeltdown were trending globally. TikTok users dissected every frame of the exchange, slowing it down, zooming in, analyzing Harry's micro-expressions like forensic experts solving a crime. The internet had found its newest obsession, and once the machine of social media locked onto it, there was no stopping it. One clip in particular dominated the feeds. Hasan's smirking retort, "I didn't know we still did that in 2025, followed by the roar of the audience and Harry's cold, stony face. The contrast was cinematic. Commenters didn't need context. They had the perfect visual of power meeting irreverence, pride meeting satire. This is what happens when entitlement meets reality, one viral tweet read. Another said, Hasan Minhaj just did what the British press tried for years. He made the prince look small. Within 12 hours, the video had over 20 million views on TikTok alone. YouTube compilations appeared under titles like Hasan Minhaj destroys Prince Harry in 60 seconds and Top 5 Royal Meltdowns caught on camera. Every platform amplified the moment differently. Twitter with its memes, TikTok with dramatic remixes, Instagram with side-by-side reaction videos. Even Reddit threads broke the incident down into cultural theory discussions, debating whether it symbolized the death of monarchy as a modern institution or just another celebrity ego clash. But perhaps the most brutal battlefield was in the comment sections. Imagine leaving the palace because you wanted normal life and then demanding to be called Your Highness on a comedy show, wrote one user. Another replied, he wanted freedom but forgot that freedom means you're fair game. Amid the snark and mockery, there were voices defending Harry, some calling Hasan's behavior disrespectful, even xenophobic. British respect isn't the same as American informality, one post argued. Hasan knew what he was doing. Yet, those voices were quickly drowned out by laughter and viral gifs. The internet had spoken, and it wasn't on the prince's side. Meanwhile, royal watchers in the UK watched the chaos unfold with morbid fascination. The tabloids pounced immediately, publishing headlines that straddled the line between ridicule and relish. Prince Harry's American dream turns into late-night nightmare, blared one. Another read, not so Highness after all. U.S. comedian cuts Sussex down to size. Editorials gleefully framed the moment as karma for Harry's years of criticism against the monarchy. It seems His Royal Highness has discovered that outside the palace walls, respect is earned, not inherited, one columnist wrote. The tone was unmistakable, vindication dressed as journalism. On the other side of the Atlantic, the American press took a different approach. Major entertainment outlets labeled the clip uncomfortable, cringeworthy, and iconic. Comedy podcasts dissected it as a defining cultural moment. It's not about disrespect, one host said. It's about how Americans don't care for titles. We respect honesty, not hierarchy. Another remarked, that's what makes our comedy great. It's the one place where no one's above being roasted. For Hasan Minhaj, the fallout was both chaotic and golden. Overnight, his social media following doubled. His clip from the show became the most watched segment in the network's history. Fans flooded his comment sections with praise. Hasan just dethroned a royal without lifting a finger. Inside Montecito, the mood was far from celebratory. Harry's phone buzzed constantly. Notifications, messages, missed calls from friends, even a terse email from his publicist. Meghan, ever the strategist, had already gathered her small crisis team in their living room, laptops open, screens glowing with data analytics. The clip's unstoppable, one of their PR advisors said. Every attempt to downplay it will only fuel it more. Harry paced the room, his agitation palpable. So we just let them mock me? He asked. Do nothing? Doing something now looks defensive, Meghan said firmly. They're waiting for you to react so they can say you can't take a joke. I shouldn't have to take that kind of joke, he muttered. That wasn't humor. That was disrespect. Meghan sighed, closing her laptop. To them, it's humor. To us, it's strategy. We need to decide which matters more, dignity or damage control. Silence fell. The irony hung heavy between them. Harry had spent years insisting he wanted a normal life. Yet when the world treated him like a normal guest, he saw it as an affront. He wasn't wrong to want respect, but he was wrong to think he could demand it in a world that mocked power as instinctively as it once revered it. Across social media, memes flourished. One showed Harry sitting on Hasan's couch, captioned, "When you realize Netflix doesn't come with a throne." Another paired Hasan's quote, "Comedy's not a coronation," with an image of the crown slowly sliding off Harry's head. Even fan accounts dedicated to the couple began posting cautious messages, urging followers not to take the clip out of context. But by then, the context didn't matter. The story had transcended the moment. It had become a symbol. Every online community adopted the narrative to fit its own lens. Political commentators used it as a metaphor for fading privilege. Pop culture pages framed it as the ultimate clash of celebrity cultures. Academics even began writing think pieces about post-monarchical identity crises in media representation. In the digital age, nothing remained small. Not when it involved royalty, humor, and humiliation. Hasan himself stayed silent for the first 24 hours, which only amplified speculation. Some wondered if the network had pressured him to apologize. Others assumed he was waiting for the frenzy to peak. When he finally broke his silence with a short Instagram post, "Respect is mutual. Titles are optional." It became the quote of the week. Commenters flooded the post with laughing emojis, crown icons, and applause. His subtlety spoke louder than any interview could. Harry, on the other hand, chose silence, a strategy that backfired spectacularly. The lack of response made him look brooding, entitled, and bitter. "He can dish criticism but can't take humor," read one headline. "The self-proclaimed rebel prince melts under a comedian's spotlight," read another. Meghan's team drafted a statement about mutual respect and cultural misunderstanding, but Harry vetoed it. "I don't need to justify myself," he said. "They'll twist it anyway." Behind the scenes, Netflix executives were less forgiving. The company had invested heavily in Harry and Meghan's media ventures, and now their most bankable name was trending for all the wrong reasons. "This isn't good for business," one executive told a reporter anonymously. "Controversy is fine, but humiliation doesn't sell." By day 3, the backlash reached a fever pitch. Late-night talk shows, morning panels, even sports commentators were referencing the clip. "If Prince Harry can't laugh at himself," one joked, "he should try royal silence instead." Another quipped, "Maybe he's just mad because the only person calling him Your Highness these days is his Wi-Fi router." Each joke deepened the wound, but the most damaging effect wasn't the laughter. It was the loss of control. For the first time since leaving the monarchy, Harry realized he couldn't dictate the narrative. The image he wanted to project, humble, dignified, self-aware, was being shredded and replaced with one word: fragile. And while the world laughed, something else began to shift quietly in the background. Supporters who had once defended Harry's every decision started to express fatigue. "It's always drama," one user wrote on a Sussex fan page. "Every time they step out, it's chaos." Others echoed the sentiment. Maybe they need to stop doing interviews. In just 72 hours, what was supposed to be a harmless talk show appearance had undone months of image rebuilding. The couple's advisors began pulling scheduled appearances, canceling interviews, and freezing new collaborations until the dust settled. Let the storm pass, Meghan instructed her team. But deep down, she knew storms like this didn't pass. They lingered, reshaping perception long after the laughter faded. And as the noise reached its loudest pitch, Harry sat alone in his study that evening, scrolling through his phone in disbelief. Every meme, every punchline felt like a personal betrayal. He wasn't just a prince being mocked. He was a man being reduced to a punchline. It wasn't about the joke anymore. It was about the realization that the world had moved on, and the reverence he once commanded had been replaced by entertainment. In that moment, as the glow of his phone illuminated his face, Harry understood something he hadn't before. Hasan Minhaj hadn't taken his dignity. The internet had, because in the digital age, even princes could be dethroned by laughter.